Hey everyone, I'm Peter Barron. Welcome to today's case study. I'm really excited to have JP Watson here. So if you don't know JP, I think just before we got on was saying this is his 27th year working with and in independent schools. He's a former head, division director, assistant head. I think they've done just about everything. Today, he is the managing director at the Gowan Group, which is a consulting firm servicing independent schools. Maybe your school works with Gowan. And interesting. Let me just set this up a little bit, JP, before I turn it over. Actually, before I do that, let me just thank you for doing this today. So thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. Yeah. JP, I wrote a blog post or a newsletter. Was that like a few weeks ago? I can't remember.
Yeah,
it was a few weeks
ago, 4 weeks ago. Mm-hmm.
Right. And it was on this, what I had done is I put this survey out, had a whole bunch of people rank different business competencies that I've kind of unearthed as I've been going through the process of building Moonshot. And interestingly, marketing and enrollment and advancement, those two core competencies were ranked near the bottom of importance. And JP wrote me this very thoughtful email and talked about, I think we need to start thinking differently about how we recruit students, that we have to stop waiting for them to kind of show up at our door and hope that there's a line forming to get in, and get a little more preemptive and out into the market and really kind of employing more relational and dare I say sales strategies to building the enrollment funnel. And I was just fascinated by this because this is something that I've thought about as well and wanted to bring JP on to talk about this. So JP, thanks again. I appreciate it. And I know we're going to have a good conversation, but before we get into that, just talk about your career and your work at Gowan.
Yeah, no, thanks, Peter. Thank you so much for having me on. It's been a lot of fun following the evolution of Moonshot OS and just reading your pieces and the various interviews and case studies that you've been putting out. So thank you for doing that for our industry. It's definitely needed. So I appreciate that. So I've been, yes, as you said, this is the beginning of my 27th year in working in and with independent schools. I actually left medical school to teach. So was halfway through, top 5 in my class, doing really well, but didn't love it, and left to teach. And my family's, a bunch of teachers and doctors. So for me, it was the obvious choice. So taught and coached, invited into leadership, first as department head, then division head, then associate head of school, then head of school, then in a small school, then moved to some bigger schools and assistant associate head over enrollment management. And found my way into, I would argue that I was doing consulting most of my career once I was in leadership. Because you're helping a school become its best self all the time. And that's what consulting is. That's what you're trying to do with Moonshot OS, is help schools become even better. So I felt like I was already in a consultative role, but had some illnesses in 18 and 20 that just kind of pushed me out of the day-to-day and firmly into consulting. And it's been great. Chris Pryor, the founder of the Gowan Group, was gracious enough to invite me to join the team when I was actually quite ill, and could reach out and do some recruiting of schools, but couldn't actually do the work myself at that point. But so happy to work with Chris and our team of consultants to again help schools live into their best selves and become better businesses ultimately. And what I wanted to say about that, Peter, because I think it goes hand in hand with what your work is doing. When I think about our work at Gowan, and specifically mine, it is 100% about institutional alignment. And as we know, the businesses, beyond education, businesses that are well aligned are the ones who do the best. And so strategic planning, strategic enrollment management planning, executive coaching, talent management systems, all of the things that we do are all about alignment. And I love that work.
I could talk forever about organizational
Yeah.
alignment, but that's a whole nother
3 other
episode.
episodes, right?
Yeah, but let's circle back to the email you sent, and you talked about how, I think it, and I hate to kind of paint an industry with one brush because I know it's nuanced and schools are doing different things, but I think kind of traditionally there's been this notion of the gatherer mindset in terms of recruiting students, and I loved how you framed it. Can you break that down a little
You
bit?
bet. So we have been certainly blessed as an industry of having an overabundance for a long time. I mean, I know the last 10 to 15 years we haven't, but prior to that, we really did have an overabundance. And the gatherer mindset is that mindset of overabundance. Like, we can just be here and people are going to come to us. And we still have schools in the US who are able to function successfully with this approach because of their reputation, because of where they sit, whatever the different factors are, they're able to be very successful doing that. So I am in no way saying the gatherer mindset is something we don't need. We do. We will always need to gather. And I would argue the place we gather that's most important is our current families. So to really think about, we know if you're in schools at all, the biggest admission pool every year are your current students. So we have to gather. We have to do the things that are necessary to continue to educate and sell our families on the value of what they're experiencing. And that comes down to where our mission is delivered every day. The interactions between students and faculty and coaches and advisors and the adults in their lives. Those interactions are where the mission comes alive. That's actually where gathering in the purest form is taking place. You're cultivating those relationships at the student and family level every single day. So from that standpoint, we have to always gather.
I love that framing because that really does differentiate like the retention model and making sure that we're providing these exceptional experiences from the moment they enter the school to the moment they leave, and then even beyond, right? Like an alumni cultivation and whatnot. On the enrollment side, like, look, we got to build a funnel and then we've got to work our way down to our built class. And you articulate it really well. There are schools that are blessed by location. There are schools that are blessed by resources, reputation, competitive position, whatever the case may be, that are in a really fortunate position that they have this overabundance. But what I've heard over and over and over again, talking to, I can't even tell you how many heads of school at this point, is that the vast majority of them aren't necessarily in that position. Now, I'm looking at this nationally. I know regionally there are some distinctions, right? Like if you're in Florida, you're probably doing really well, or Texas, where there's been a lot of migration, right? People from the Northeast moving south. However, for lots of schools, like enrollment is something that they need to be like at the top of their game. And does this gatherer mindset lend to that in 2024 as things are just becoming increasingly competitive?
I think in terms of seeking new students, the gatherer mindset needs to shift, and it needs to be there, but it needs to not be the primary mode of how we're seeking new families. Our families we are always going to get families just by being there, by being who we are. And those are the ones we want to gather. And so we've got to have our staff, our enrollment folks need to know how to manage and work with those families for sure, because that's a little bit of a different sell. I mean, those are people who already want what you have. They know a bit about you. When they come on campus, I would argue that many of us have done our traditional pitch that we've done for 15, 20 years. And it's fine. It's okay. But as even that group becomes more sophisticated and the competition becomes stronger, we've got to shift even how we're working there with the families who are coming to us on their own, and really be focused on what they need.
and how that, and as that, not only as they become more sophisticated, but as that group gets smaller, right? So now you've got this gap that you have to fill and you have to cultivate. Where does, I there are terms that in our world, like people, like they cringe a little bit. So I remember 15 years ago, if you said marketing, people would be like, what are you talking about? And now over time, obviously that's changed significantly. You tell me a school that doesn't have a director of marketing, like it's pretty rare. But it seems like there's an opportunity for us to get to kind of create other skills that will allow us to get more targeted in terms of our recruitment and, dare I say, like sales, right? Like at the end of the day, an admission officer has a responsibility to bring in at least 79% of revenue for their school. If in some cases it's a lot more than that, right? So they have to, it's a big responsibility. And what I'm trying to do here is to equip folks with some ideas around, like I'm struggling in this area. How can I improve? So how can somebody, develop some skills in order to kind of figure out, all right, I've got these families that are just going to show up no matter what, but then I have a lot of seats that I have to fill with folks who don't even know who we are.
Yeah, no, it's a great point, Peter. And I think about, the vast majority of our day schools, are very tuition dependent. 85% and above of revenue comes from tuition. And so, yes, it's, your enrollment managers are responsible for a huge number in the budget for sure. So as I think about what we've worked on, I worked on when I was in schools and now in consulting, of thinking about the hunter and gatherer. It's a yes and. It's a yes and.
Right.
And the skills cross over, certainly in terms of deep listening, understanding exactly who you're speaking with, who you're taking on a tour, gathering the information ahead of time so you can tailor that tour to them. I would argue that's on both sides, the family who you went out and found and the family who came to you, because we want them to have the best experience possible. So that's, most of this is not new. It's just conceptually a different way to think about it.
So you're blending mindsets, right? At you've got to shift at critical moments so that you're creating the biggest value prop you can for your school.
And you're shifting from and admittedly, many of our schools have had this attitude of, we don't need to go and find people. They need us more than we need them. So you didn't do a lot on retention, because you knew you could find plenty of people to replace them. That, as you know, Peter, that paradigm has shifted significantly. We have to focus on retention, and then how do we find more people? So it is that shift in attitude in many ways.
So what are some of the skills to be able to do that, to go find families?
So one of the things that I've worked, again, both at schools where I was and then in our consulting, is helping enrollment managers and folks who are responsible for outreach realize that there are a lot of low-hanging fruit out there. The general pieces like Rotary clubs, belonging, not just going and delivering a speech, but belonging, being part of the community, the chambers of commerce, art museums, local local philharmonics, whatever it is your school focuses on, make sure you're out in the community supporting those pieces. And then your students oftentimes will get to come along. But those are just the general things. So then it's, how do we do more targeted marketing, but really outreach? We encourage folks to use their board of trustees, to use influential people within who are already inside their community, and bring them in, create, an advisory board, if it's a parent outreach committee or however you structure it in your school, but working directly with them on developing ideas and then events, outreach events, perhaps even in people's homes. I've done those, several years, many a time where we're at a home 45 minutes away from the school, and this is a day school. And that yields 3 families who are willing to carpool and come that far because what they want is what we have. But it's even more effective when it's 5 minutes from the school, and you're able to penetrate, a demographic that you may not have.
Yeah. I'll put a pitch in for NAS Market View too. I did inside of Moonshot Lab, Tim Fish and Stephanie Wilkinson did a whole breakdown of Market View. And I walked away thinking, boy, like every school should be jumping in there, head first, right? It's a deep pool with lots of data. And if you haven't used Market View and you're a member of NAIS, I think you just log into NAIS and it's part of your dashboard. But the brilliance of it is it marries all this demographic data across the country and then contextualizes it for your school. So you could see like the zip codes and wealth ratings related to zip codes. You could see socioeconomic information, ethnicity. I mean, there's all sorts of things that you can use to effectively like segment the data to figure out where should we be directing our energy. And I think that's really powerful just from a pure recruitment point of view, because the data is like so important to all this.
And if you can take your database of students and inquiries, put it into Google Maps, and you can overlay. That's what before that tool was here, we had another tool that we used, and you overlay those two. So then I'm looking at what are the specific families at my school that live in that neighborhood that, wow, that person, is really big in this field. And so let's see if we can target some folks in that field in their home there in that neighborhood that we know has, the right demographics.
That's such a good point. And I forgot to mention that you can upload your data in fact, they had like one-click integrations with both Blackbaud and Veracross. I mean, they couldn't make it any easier. It's just such a powerful tool that's, in the past you would have to pay a lot of money for, but it's now just a pure member benefit. So, somebody who used to be deep into associations, like I look at that and like, boy, that's really powerful. That's really powerful.
Tremendous value for sure.
Tremendous value. So, you talked a little bit about some strategies, but like what other strategies might somebody think about as they're trying to kind of move into that hunter mindset versus the gatherer to fill that top of the funnel?
So again, the one for me that, and I'm going to repeat some of what I just said, but the one for me that is the most effective and that I've seen be most effective is working with our current families or our alums. It's that current community. And again, looking at the demographics that you were just talking about, or whatever makes sense for your community. If we're a school who is seeking to diversify socioeconomically, well, then we need to be very specific about how we're targeting families and looking for influential families already at our school or in the community. If I've developed relationships out in the community as an outreach person, I'm going to start tapping into those relationships. It becomes so much of what we do. And as you know, Peter, is relationship. And yes, here on campus, yes, with the families who are coming to us, and even more so out in the community, in truly developing those relationships so that I can bring them back or expose them to what is possible. Because, oftentimes people don't, we all know there's so many people who don't understand independent schools. So this is my argument to the schools who can function in the gathering mode. I'd say you need to get out in the hunting mode too. And the reason I would say that is, A, you don't know what you don't know. So you don't know what's out there. You don't know what the conversation is about your school unless you're out in the midst of it. So you don't know what you don't know. And you also, I would argue, have an obligation to our industry to continue to push forward what it means to be an independent school. And so when you're out there talking about, yes, your school, but also other schools, just independent schools in general, that tide starts rising. And we love it when a rising tide is lifting all boats.
Yeah, independent schools are a tremendous brand. We just need to let more folks know, that it's available. The thing I love is, I look at NAIS membership and I think of the schools enrolled, there's about 740,000 students enrolled, right? You then look at the overall population of school-age children and it's 56 million, about 4 or 5 million more go to other tuition-bearing schools like, a Catholic school, Christian school, what have you. So that leaves us with 51 million kids, right? And there's opportunity abound. It's just that I think, there's a lot of education that has to happen, and it's not easy. And I'm not suggesting that we can just snap our fingers, but I think some of what you're talking about is one way in order to kind of cultivate those new pockets of families who could be interested. So to do that, I'm curious, like I'm big on skill training, right? Like, are there particular skills that you think folks who are interested in shifting mindset should be thinking about?
So in terms of shifting mindset, I mean, again, I think one of the biggest pieces is deep listening, in terms of being able to understand, what people are needing, what the problem is that they're looking to solve by coming to your school. So that's one of the pieces. I think the skill of tracking and understanding data is critical. And we've talked about demographic data, but, if you're going to be looking at, very, very clearly looking at what's the impact of what we're doing, you have to be tracking all levels of the funnel, but not just all levels of the funnel, specifically within the geography that you're looking at. So if we have families from 20 different towns per se, we need to be tracking it by town. And if you want to get even more granular, you can, but track the things that you want to see a difference with and go after it. I mean, it is that for us, at the schools, when I was in schools where we saw an increase from 13% students of color in a K-4 class to 38% students of color in 1 year. And then it stayed at that level, because we were very specific about how we were doing our outreach. And
you made that a priority.
We made it a priority, and it made a massive difference. And it shifted the demographics in the lower school, the preschool and then lower school, which is exactly what the school was striving to do.
Right. So if somebody's thinking, okay, I want to broaden my strategy, I want to incorporate some hunter mindsets, what are some challenges or obstacles that you may see in front of them, just so that they have an idea, okay, this may be some of the things I have to contend with as I head in that path.
So some organizations are not excited about having you as a part of them, just to be blunt. I've worked at several schools. Two of them, we had an incredible relationship with the public schools. Incredible. I mean, we worked hand in hand. Worked on our students would partner together for tsunami relief, Asian tsunami relief. We did massive fundraiser together. The students did all of it. Other times you're in a place where people don't want any part of you. So you have to really read what in your community, where are the opportunities, to reach out. I've found for the most part, nonprofit art institutions are tremendous. I love Rotary. I love Chamber of Commerce. I've had great success just in being in those organizations, and then there's kind of residual impact. But again, those are kind of that broader, hunting, because you're just expanding your brand and brand awareness more than anything.
So when you did this work, did you find that the priorities that you set for enrollment really informed the way you went to market?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So is that the place to start, is just creating those institutional priorities?
Mm-hmm. And again, thank you for asking it that way, because that's a great reminder that it is aligning what we're doing with what we're seeking to achieve. And your messaging has got to be really clean. It's if the school doesn't already have clarity on who it is, who it serves, and what its outcomes are, then that's a place to start. Because going out into the field with a muddy message doesn't help at all. In fact, it may do damage, because then then there's no real narrative. And you also can't train your parent volunteers or the people who, or even if they're not volunteering, they don't know what to say when they're out in their community.
Hey, last question. So imagine a school called you today or tomorrow and said, I want to broaden that mindset. I want to incorporate more kind of that hunter mindset in terms of cultivating enrollments. But we don't know where to start. What would you suggest that they do on day one?
I think the easiest place to start is internally. That's the easiest place to start. So, cultivating that with your enrollment folks. Division heads need to know what you're doing. The people who are most involved in enrollment need to know what you're doing and why you're doing it. Then bringing in parents, key parents and trustees who would want to be a part of these efforts to reach out and find additional families who are mission appropriate, who serve the priorities that you as an institution are seeking to serve.
Okay, I have one more question for you. So imagine an aspiring leader on the academic side of the house that has career ambition. Maybe they want to become a division director or associate head or head of school. Why should they build some competency around enrollment? Why do you think that's important?
Well, I think we've already said it. 90% of the budget comes from tuition. It's tough to lead if you don't understand that side of the ledger. If you don't understand how and what the various strategies are, then you don't have as much of an opportunity to lead that part of the business, that part of the school.
Well, JP Watson, Managing Director at the Gowan Group, thanks for sharing so much of your expertise here. Hey, if somebody wants to reach out and connect with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
You bet. Email. Well, LinkedIn obviously is a piece of cake, but email is jpwatson@thegowangroup.com. And my cell is 706-614-4843.
Perfect. JP, thanks again. I appreciate it. And hopefully, this has been helpful for folks.
I hope so.